At 20, Delia Marsh had $47, a backpack with a cracked frame, and no forwarding address. She'd been out of the system for 2 years and through 4 situations since, the last of which had ended with her carrying everything she owned down a fire escape at 2 a.m. in Burlington, Vermont. Which was not the worst thing that had ever happened to her, but was recent enough to still feel like it. The $47 was from 3 days of day labor at a warehouse outside Winooski. The backpack had belonged to someone else. The ice house had come up at a municipal tax auction that Thursday morning, listed as a derelict agricultural outbuilding on 1.2 acres in Cabot, Vermont, assessed at $0, minimum bid $5, and when the auctioneer said going once, going twice, Delia had raised her hand because no one else did, and because $5 was something she had. She did not know, when she raised her hand, that the parcel was listed under the name Elias Marsh. She did not know until the county clerk handed her the deed and she saw the name printed on the prior ownership line, that Elias Marsh had been her grandfather. She had never met him. She had never been told he existed. The auction was in the basement of the county building in Hardwick. Folding chairs, a projector screen, 11 people including the auctioneer. The properties went in order, a right-of-way dispute resolved by sale to the adjacent landowner. A condemned mobile home on 2 acres that went for $1,200 to a man in a Carhartt jacket who'd come prepared. A parcel of logged-over timber acreage that drew a brief bidding war and sold for $4,100. Then parcel number 7. 1.2 acres, Cabot, outbuilding only, no primary residence. Structure described as a traditional New England ice house, timber-framed, stone foundation, last assessed in 1987, tax delinquent since 1994. Photograph on the screen, a low building, nearly square, half buried in a hillside, stone walls to the roofline on 3 sides, wooden gable on the 4th, a single door sealed with a hasp and padlock. The surrounding land was overgrown birch and brush. The roof had a visible sag on the east side, minimum bid $5. The auctioneer looked around the room. Nobody moved. Delia raised her hand. The auctioneer looked at her for a moment. He said, "Going once." He said, "Going twice." He said, "Sold, $5 to the young woman in the back." She paid at the window with a $5 bill she had been carrying in the front pocket of her jeans. The clerk printed the deed transfer and stapled it to the tax receipt and handed it across the counter with a look that wasn't unkind. Delia read the prior owner line in the hallway outside. Elias Henry Marsh. Cabot, Vermont. Her last name was Marsh. Her mother's name had been Marsh. Her mother had been dead since Delia was 4, and there had been no one after that who told her anything about where the name came from, or who else carried it. She stood in the county building hallway, with the deed in both hands. Then she went to find the ice house. The road to Cabot was 20 minutes south, 2-lane, following the hills. The land flattened into open valley and then rose again on both sides, farms on the hillsides, maples in their early April bare branch gray. Delia had gotten directions from the clerk's office, county road, to a numbered town road to a gravel lane, left at the stone wall, property at the end. The gravel lane was mostly grass now. 2 tire tracks with a spine of vegetation between them that brushed the underside of the county truck she'd borrowed the use of for the afternoon from the day labor dispatcher, a man named Gus, who had said she could use it until 4. She drove slowly. The lane curved around a stand of birch, and the ice house appeared on the left, set into the hillside exactly as in the photograph. Stone and timber, and a door with a rusted padlock. She sat in the truck for a moment. The building was small, maybe 20 feet by 20. The stone walls banked with earth on 3 sides, so only the gable end faced out. The roof was cedar shakes, old enough to have grown a beard of moss. sagging on the east end where a rafter had given way under decades of snow load. A birch tree had come up within 2 feet of the south wall. The door was pine, thick, with iron hardware that had gone the color of old blood. 3 things were failing: the roof, the east rafter, the padlock hasp, which had pulled away from the frame on one side and been reattached with a bolt that didn't fit the original hole. One thing was not failing: the walls. The ice house was a dry laid stone structure 2 feet thick at the base, laid by someone who understood stone. And it had not moved in however many decades it had been standing. It would not move in several more. Delia got out of the truck and walked to the door. The padlock was a standard hardware store model, the same brand as every padlock she'd ever dealt with in her life. She looked at it for a moment, then went back to the truck and found Gus's toolbox behind the seat. She took out a bolt cutter. The hasp gave on the second try. The door swung inward, slow, on iron hinges that had not moved in 30 years. The cold came out first, a sustained cold, deeper than the April air outside, the cold of a space that had been sealed and insulated and left. Then the smell, sawdust, old and dry, and something else underneath it that she would spend the next hour trying to place before she understood was the smell of ice that had long since melted and been absorbed into the sawdust that lined the floor, the ghost of every winter this building had ever stored. She stood in the doorway and waited for her eyes to adjust. The interior was a single room. The walls were lined with sawdust packed between the stone and an inner layer of board insulation, some of it pulled away in places, some intact. The floor was sawdust over stone. Along the north wall, a shelf system built from hand-hewn timber, 8 feet tall. Empty. Along the south wall, a workbench, tools still on it, organized on pegs and in labeled tins the way someone organizes tools they intend to come back to. On the workbench, a kerosene lantern, a tin of matches, lid sealed with electrical tape, a folded canvas tarp, and a coffee can with a plastic lid, the kind from the grocery store, with a strip of masking tape on the lid marked in faded ink. For Delia, she was across the room before she'd decided to move. The coffee can was heavier than it should have been. She peeled the tape from the lid. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth and secured with a rubber band, a key. Brass, old, the bow stamped with the initials EHM below the key, folded into quarters, a piece of paper. She unfolded it. Her grandfather's handwriting. She didn't know it was his, not yet. But she would recognize it later in everything else he'd written, the same deliberate forward lean. The careful letters of a man who had not had much schooling and had taught himself to write well, because it mattered to him. The shelf on the north wall. 3rd section from the left. Pull the middle board forward. She looked at the shelf. She walked to it. She counted 3 sections from the left, found the middle board, and pulled. It came forward on a wooden pivot pin, taking the 2 boards above and below it, with it as a single panel, and behind it was a space in the stone wall 2 feet deep and 4 feet wide, packed tight from floor to ceiling. She reached in and pulled out the first thing her hands found: a mason jar. Then another. Then another. She brought them out one by one and set them on the workbench in the light from the open door. 14 mason jars, sealed with wax over the lids, each one labeled in the same handwriting, dates, 1 per jar, running from 1962 to 1989. Inside each jar, folded papers, rolled tight to fit through the mouth. She lit the kerosene lantern with one of the matches from the tin. Behind the jars, in the back of the hidden space, a flat tin box, the kind for Christmas cookies, with a rubber band around it and her name on a label on the top. Delia Rose Marsh. And behind the tin box, in an envelope sealed with candle wax, her name again in the same hand, and nothing else. She left the envelope where it was. She carried the mason jars and the tin box to the workbench and lit the second lamp she found on the shelf, and sat on a low stool that had been there long enough to feel like furniture. She opened the tin box first. Photographs, a bundle of them, loose, held with a rubber band that snapped when she touched it. The top one, a man, late 30s, standing in front of the ice house, one hand on the door frame, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who doesn't often have their picture taken and is not sure what to do with their face. He was lean, weathered, with working hands and a canvas jacket and eyes that were light in color and direct. She had her mother's eyes. She had seen her mother's eyes in photographs. She was looking at where those eyes came from. She went through the photographs slowly. The man, Elias, through the years. The ice house in different seasons. A woman Delia didn't recognize, in photographs from the 60s, with a quality of light around her that said she'd been the one taking most of the other pictures, this being one of the rare times she'd handed the camera off. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, with light eyes and dark hair, in a yard Delia didn't know. She turned the photograph over. Her grandfather's handwriting, Ruth. 1971, her mother's name had been Ruth. Delia set the photograph down on the workbench and looked at the wall for a while. Then, she opened the first mason jar. 1962, she used the lantern blade to cut the wax seal and worked the lid free and shook the papers out onto the workbench and unrolled them. They were journal pages, not torn from a book, but written on individual sheets that had been rolled and sealed in the jar to preserve them. The handwriting was the same, younger, more uncertain in places, learning its own style. April 1962. First year keeping the ice house full through to summer. Cut 32 blocks from the pond in February, packed in 12 inches of sawdust each layer. Should keep to August if the weather holds. Sold 14 blocks to the Cavendish Dairy last week. They paid on time. She opened 1965. 1968, the entries moved between the practical and the personal in the way of someone who had no one else to tell things to. Ice yields. Prices paid at the dairy co-op. The cost of a new draw knife. Then, March 1966. Ruth walked today. 8 months and 3 days. She does everything late and then all at once. She looked very pleased with herself. Winter 1969. Ruth asked me today why we don't have a mother. I told her it was just us and that was enough. She thought about it and said okay. She is a very practical child. I don't know where she got that. September 1974. Ruth is gone to Burlington. Nursing program. She hugged me once at the bus station and got on the bus without looking back. She always did things cleanly. I stood there for a long time after the bus left. The light through the open door was moving. Afternoon was going somewhere. Delia opened jars and read and did not notice the time passing. January 1978. Ruth called. She sounds good. She sounds happy. There's a man. She didn't say much about him, but she said his name twice, which with Ruth means something. June 1982. Ruth wrote that she's expecting. She didn't say she was happy. She didn't have to. I could tell from the way she wrote the sentence, the way she put a period at the end, and then, I imagine, sat back. December 1983. Ruth called from the hospital. Girl. They named her Delia Rose. Ruth said she has light eyes and dark hair and a very strong opinion about being hungry, which she is not shy about sharing. I said that sounded familiar. Ruth laughed. It's been a long time since I heard her laugh. Delia set the jar pages down. She pressed both palms flat on the workbench and looked at the wall and held herself very still. He had known. He had known she existed since the day she was born, and he had written her name in a mason jar and sealed it and put it on a shelf in an ice house in Cabot, Vermont. And there had been 37 years between that sentence and this moment, and she had not known he existed until 4 hours ago. December 1983. They named her Delia Rose. She sat on the low stool with the pages in her lap and the lantern burning, and did not move for a long time. She was still there when the truck came. A small pickup, older, that came up the lane and stopped beside Gus's truck. A woman got out, 60s, short gray hair, in a barn coat and rubber boots, carrying a thermos and a paper bag. She stood at the open door of the ice house and looked in. "I saw a light," she said. "I'm Bea Cavendish. My family has the dairy on the county road. We bought ice from Elias for 30 years. Delia looked up. "I'm his granddaughter." Bea Cavendish stood very still for a moment. Then she came inside. She sat on a crate near the door and poured 2 cups from the thermos, coffee, strong, the real kind, and handed one across. She looked at the mason jars on the workbench and at the photographs and at Delia's face. "You look like Ruth," she said. "You knew her?" "She grew up out here. Before she went to Burlington." Bea wrapped both hands around her cup. "Elias raised her alone after her mother passed. Ruth was maybe 3. He never talked about it much. He was not a man who talked about things, but he was a man who did things, which with some people is the same." She looked at the walls. "He kept this ice house running until refrigeration made it unnecessary, which was sometime in the 70s. And then he kept it anyway, because he said it was good stonework and he wasn't going to let good stonework go to ruin. He left papers in here," Delia said. "Jars going back to 62. Bea nodded slowly. "He said once that he kept a record. He didn't say of what." She looked at the hidden space, still open, the stone behind it visible. "He asked me once. This was maybe 2001. He was already old. He said, 'If anyone ever comes looking, you send them here first. Don't tell them what's in it. Just send them here.'" She looked at Delia. "I didn't know anyone would come. I thought the county would take it, and that would be the end." "How did he know someone would come?" Bea looked at her cup. "Elias knew things about people without being told. He had a very quiet way of watching." She paused. "He knew about you. After Ruth died, he tried to find you, through the state, through the courts. He couldn't get anywhere. He told me once that the system had you and wouldn't give you back, and there was nothing he could do from here but wait and leave something for you to find." Delia held her coffee with both hands and looked at the open door and the April light coming through it. "He waited," she said. "He waited," Bea said. "That was all he could do. She stayed for an hour. She said she came to the lane every week or so to check the property had not been vandalized. She said she had a spare room that Delia was welcome to use while she sorted things out. She said there was a good hardware store in Cabot Village, and that the roof rafter could be sistered without pulling the whole east side if the damage hadn't gone to the plate, which she didn't think it had. She left the thermos and the paper bag, which had 2 sandwiches in it. She said she'd be back Thursday. She came back Wednesday. If you've made it this far into Delia's story, hit subscribe. Because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The letter came from a developer named Alcott Properties, LLC, out of Montpelier. It was addressed to Delia Marsh at Bea Cavendish's address, which told her someone had been paying attention at the county clerk's office. It stated that Alcott Properties had been in negotiation with the county regarding the parcel prior to the tax auction, and had expected to acquire it through a subsequent private sale process, that the auction result was being reviewed by their legal team, and that they were prepared to offer Delia $28,000 for the parcel as a courtesy resolution, given that she had paid $5 and the true market value accounting for the acreage and road access was significantly higher. The letter was 3 pages. It had a logo. A man named Preston arrived 4 days later in a white Jeep Grand Cherokee, clean, with Vermont plates that were too new. He was 40 or so, in a fleece vest over a collared shirt, and he walked the perimeter of the property with the careful attention of someone tallying numbers. "Miss Marsh," he had a business card. "I think you understand the situation." The letter was pretty clear. He looked at the ice house, at the new temporary roof support she and Bee's nephew had installed over the east rafter. "You've been doing some work." "A little. The offer is generous for a structure in this condition. I'm not selling." He looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating a conversation he thought he'd already finished. "The parcel has access implications for an adjacent development. I understand," Delia said. "I'm not selling." He said something about easement rights and legal review timelines. She said he was welcome to pursue those through whatever process he preferred. He left. She went to the tin box. She had not yet looked at everything in it. Behind the photographs, she had found the deed, the original, handwritten, 1958, Elias Henry Marsh, 1.2 acres, Cabot, Vermont, purchased for cash, and a second document she had set aside to read carefully, which she now read carefully. It was a letter from a Vermont attorney named Oakes, dated 1998, confirming that the parcel had been placed in a testamentary trust with Delia Rose Marsh, named as sole beneficiary. The trust to become active upon Elias's death. The property to pass to Delia directly and clear of any claims by creditors, municipal bodies, or third parties. Elias had done it in 1998. Delia had been 15, somewhere in the system. He had named her anyway and kept the letter in the tin box and sealed the tin box in the ice house and waited. She called the attorney's name on the letter. The practice had changed hands, but the files were intact. The new attorney, a woman named Sutton in Montpelier, pulled the trust document in 20 minutes. She read Alcott's letter over the phone and said the claim had no legal surface to stand on. She said she would draft the response that afternoon. Delia asked what she owed. "Elias Marsh cleared a drainage ditch on my grandmother's property in 1987, Sutton said, "and refused payment 3 times. And on the 4th refusal, my grandmother gave up and baked him a pie." She said he ate the whole thing standing at the kitchen counter and seemed embarrassed about it. A pause. "This one's on us." She opened the envelope that night. It had been on the workbench since the first day, the candle wax seal intact. Bee had lent her a cot and a sleeping bag, and she'd been staying in the ice house for 5 days, which was warmer than it had been and colder than it would be, and was hers, which made it different from every other place she'd slept in 2 years. She sat on the cot with the lantern on the shelf above her and broke the wax seal with her thumbnail. The paper inside was thick, the good kind, not notebook paper. He had saved good paper for this. "Delia, I don't know how old you are when you're reading this. I don't know what your life has been. I tried to find you after your mother passed, and the state told me you were placed, and they couldn't give me information, and I didn't have money enough for an attorney who could fight that. Not then. By the time I did, you were 18 and out of the system and gone somewhere I couldn't locate. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I couldn't get to you sooner. I have thought about it every day. Your mother was the best person I ever knew. She was practical and unsentimental, and she loved fiercely and quietly, the way some people do, so that you don't always know it until it's gone. You have her eyes. I can see it in the photograph your mother sent me when you were 2 days old, which I have kept in the tin box all this time because it was mine and I was not going to let it go. The property is yours. The trust is clean. There's a savings account at the Cabot Bank. The book is in the tin box, underneath the photographs. I saved what I could. It isn't much. Enough to fix the roof properly and have something remaining. The ice house is good stone and good timber, and it will stand for another 100 years if someone tends it. I want you to tend it. That's what I want, not because it's worth money, though it's worth something. Because your great-grandmother's family built it in 1887, and your great-grandfather improved it in 1931, and I ran it for 40 years, and it is the most solid thing our family ever made, and I would like it to stay in the family. You are the family. You are all of it that's left. I am so glad you exist. Your grandfather, Elias Delia, folded the letter. She pressed it against her chest and held it there, and felt the cold of the stone walls around her and the warmth of the lantern and the weight of everything she hadn't known she was looking for until she found it. After a long time she unfolded it and read the last line again. I am so glad you exist. She put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in the tin box and set the tin box on the highest shelf where the light hit it in the morning. Then she lay down on the cot and listened to the dark. The roof came first. The east rafter was bad, but the plate was sound, which B's nephew Calvin confirmed with a probe and some language about bearing points that Delia followed closely because she intended to understand the building she was living in. They sistered the damaged rafter in a weekend. Calvin and Delia and a friend of Calvin's named Pete, who was a carpenter and worked for the cost of lunch and seemed to find the project interesting. The cedar shakes on the east side came off and went to the burn pile, and new ones went on in their place. By the end of the second weekend, the roof was sound, and Delia had learned more about timber frame construction than she'd known existed. The savings book was in the tin box under the photographs. First Cabot Bank, account in the name of the Elias H. Marsh Trust. Balance, $31,447. Saved in the way the binder entries showed, steadily in small amounts. Over decades, she used $12,000 for materials and left the rest. Bea Cavendish's dairy was 2 miles down the county road, and it had a problem Delia identified on her third visit without being asked. The refrigeration unit in the milk house was running warm at the top of its cycle, which meant a failing seal, which meant spoilage risk, which Delia knew because she had worked 3 months at a cold storage facility in Winooski, and the unit failure mode was identical. She told B. B called the refrigeration company, and they confirmed it and fixed it, and later asked B where she'd gotten the tip. B told them. The refrigeration company's service manager called Delia the following week and asked if she wanted work. She started the following Monday. She was good at it. She already knew that about herself. That she was good with cold systems, with the logic of temperature and insulation and the slow variables that determined whether a thing held or failed. She had just never had a reason to pursue it. Word spread the way it always does. B told people. People told people. A dairy farmer in Walden with a failing bulk tank. A vegetable operation in Craftsbury with a walk-in that was leaking cold. An orchard in Greensboro with a controlled atmosphere storage room that needed recalibrating. Delia drove to each one in the used truck she bought in May with $1,100 she'd earned, diagnosed the problem, fixed what she could, called the service manager for the rest. She charged fairly. She sometimes charged less than fairly. When a small operation with tight margins couldn't pay the full amount, she quoted a figure she called the neighbor rate and let it go. She was not conscious, at first, of doing what Elias had done. She became conscious of it by degrees. A girl showed up in June. She came up the lane on foot, carrying a duffel bag and wearing clothes that had been worn for several days. She was 19. She stood at the edge of the clearing in front of the ice house and looked at the building without coming closer. And there was something in the way she stood that Delia recognized the way you recognize your own reflection. "You can come in," Delia said from the doorway. Her name was Wren. She'd been in the system in New Hampshire until 18, then a sequence of situations that had narrowed to this road in this county without a clear plan for what came next. She had a practical way of describing things and a careful way of listening that told Delia she'd learned to read rooms young. "There's a loft," Delia said. "I put a cot up there last month. I don't know why I did that." "Maybe you knew someone was coming," Wren said. Delia looked at her. Maybe. She showed her the loft, the lantern, the propane burner she'd added, the water line she'd run from the slope above the building. She showed her how the lock worked and where the spare key lived. She did not list conditions. "Why?" Wren said. Delia looked at the ice house walls, the stone her great-grandmother's family had laid in 1887, and that had not moved since. "Someone left this for me," she said. "Waited 40 years to leave it. The least I can do is keep the door open." Preston from Alcott Properties returned in July, alone, in a different vehicle. He walked to the edge of the clearing and stopped there and looked at the building, the new roof, the repaired door hardware, the light in the loft window, and then at Delia, and did not say anything for a moment. "It looks better," he said. "It was always good bones." He nodded. He looked like a man who had something he was considering saying and had not yet decided if it was worth the effort. Then he reached into his jacket and took out a card and held it out. "If you ever need a structural assessment," he said. "My brother does them. He's good." She took the card. He left. Calvin came back in August, and Pete, and a third man named Roy, who had heard about the ice house and wanted to see it, and ended up helping install the interior shelving Delia had been planning since March. They worked 2 Saturdays, and the ice house began to look like what it had once been. Not a ruin, but a working building. Cold storage, properly insulated. The shelves her grandfather had built cleaned and plumb and ready. Bea came on the 2nd Saturday with sandwiches and her good thermos and watched the work with an expression Delia had come to know. "He would have liked this," Bea said. "I know." He would have said it looked reasonable and moved on to the next thing. Delia smiled. "I know." She found the last jar in September. She'd been through all 14, cataloged the pages, read every entry, filed them in chronological order in a binder she'd started keeping the same way Elias had kept things, methodically, by year, each section labeled. But she'd miscounted. There were 15 jars. The 15th had rolled to the back of the hidden space and been hidden by shadow, and she found it with her hand, not her eyes, when she was cleaning the inside of the space on a Wednesday afternoon. The label said 1990. She opened it. The first page. March 1990. An ice delivery to the Cavendish Dairy, 40 blocks, good yield. The pond had run late into February. The second page. May 1990. Bea Cavendish's girl had her baby. Early, 6 weeks. The baby is fine. They didn't have insurance. I sent what I could to the hospital charity account, $600, told them not to say who. I don't know if it covered much. I hope it covered something. Delia looked at the page. Then she went to find Bea. Bea was at her truck at the end of the lane. Delia held out the page without explaining. Bea read it once, then again, and then stood for a long time looking at the lane. "My daughter," she said. 1990. The baby was in the NICU for 3 weeks. He sent $600. Bea pressed her lips together. She handed the page back. She looked at the ice house. The baby is 40 now, she said. Teaches school in Hardwick. She got in her truck and sat there for a moment before starting it. Delia waited. That was Elias, Bea said through the window. That was exactly Elias. She drove back to her dairy on an October night when the first real cold of the season had come in off the hills and the stars were very bright and very close above the clearing. Delia turned off the lantern inside the ice house and stepped out and latched the door. She stood in the clearing and looked at the building. The light in the loft was on. Wren's. Amber and steady through the small window above the door. The stone walls held the starlight the way stone holds cold, deep and still. She put her hand against the wall. The stone was dry and rough under her palm. Her great-grandmother's family had laid these stones in 1887. Her grandfather had kept this building for 40 years after it stopped being necessary because he said it was good stonework and he wasn't going to let good stonework go to ruin. She had paid $5 for it in April, and she had been paying for it in different currency since. From the tin box on the high shelf inside, the photograph she'd found at the bottom of the bundle, the one she'd come back to a dozen times. Her grandfather, younger than in the others, maybe 30, standing at the door of the ice house in winter, snow on the roof. One hand raised against the cold. Looking at the camera with that expression, uncertain what to do with his face, and through the uncertainty, something else. Something that looked like hope that the photograph would last. It had lasted. Delia stood in the October dark and felt the cold of the stone under her palm and the warmth of the light in the window above her, and was 20 years old and had nowhere to be in the morning except here, which was the first time in her life that was true. She had come from something. She had a wall to put her hand on. She left the light burning and went inside.